Hi everyone, my name is Jada and welcome to today's TREA how-to workshop on how to prepare your garden and garden tools 101 with Gerry Fradette. Before we start the session, please keep your mic muted so that we can avoid any background noises as we begin. Also note that there is a chat box where you can write any question you have, but overall, a Q&A session will be taken after we watch Gerry's video together. Furthermore, we're recording this presentation, so if you cannot be with us throughout the entire session, you can watch it again or share it with a friend when the recording is shared on TREA's YouTube channel, where we'll send you the link when it is available. So stay tuned. This workshop series has been made attainable thanks to the support from the Ontario Trillium Foundation. As you may or may not know by now, Thames Region Ecological Association is hosting this workshop. TREA is a local non-profit registered charity who has been active in the community since 1986 on important environmental issues. It is known for a number of activities such as special events, workshops, programs to engage community, and encourage public policy. TREA's main objective is to educate members and the community to protect the environment, stay informed, and take personal action on climate change. Its vision is a sustainable community. Topics over time have included air quality, plastics, pesticides, PCBs, anti-idling, green consumerism, and much more, with a current focus around waste reduction, active transportation, and action against climate change. Before we begin, I would like to introduce our lead speaker, Gerry Fradette. Gerry, could you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes, I've been gardening since about 10 years old when my father started a contracting business and didn't have the time to garden. So I took over and I have been gardening pretty much ever since, wherever I had option to do that. And just love gardening. I spend most of my time in the garden, only come into the house to perform duties associated with eating and sleeping, I guess, or processing my foods. I want to thank TREA and Getty and all those involved with this video and for the opportunity to share what I've gained knowledge.
Thank you so much, Gerry. Really appreciate it. And now we will watch Gerry's video where he will provide us with tips and advice on how to prepare your garden for the winter season, as well as describing some of the tools that he uses in his garden, as you could see in the pictures. As a reminder, we will be having a Q&A session after this video, so be sure to write your questions down in the chat box. Hello everybody, here we are with Gerry Fradette. We're having another how-to session workshop with TREA. My name is Jada, and Gerry here is going to talk about his garden, in particular how to prepare it for the winter season, as well as explaining the kind of tools he uses and in general what they are for. So thank you so much, Gerry.
You're welcome. Anyway, I may as well start in the spring. I plant all my, come this way, all my seedlings in newspaper tubes, which I roll from newspapers, obviously, around a form. So I just roll these up, I pinch the bottom over, like that. It makes me a nice little tube. I fill them with soil, and I start my plants, my seedlings, using a soil blocker. I make a slurry of soil and press it into there, and then I put it into a tray, like this, and I put one seed in each block. And the ones that grow will go into a tube, and they grow under grow lights in the basement until they get large enough to come out to the greenhouse. You can make them in various sizes by using different sizes of plastic pipes for different types of plants. The big ones I use for cucumbers or squash if I'm starting them inside. And these are berry boxes I get from strawberries, from humans. I use these trays and I line up between two of them with saran wrap, or like a plastic wrap. And that way I can pour water and keep a 1/4 inch of water in the bottom, which keeps the plants fed with water while they're growing. I worked it out over a number of years. I've used different methods, but this one works the best for me. So now the tools that I use in the garden, my favorite tools are this small rake. I cut down off the ends so that I can rake in between the rows of plants. And it also, I make a furrow with this in the ground when I'm planting garlic in the fall. We rake it out and plant the garlic in there and then fill it back in with soil. There's various different kinds of rakes that you can have. This is a bow rake, and it's for a garden rake. This rake here is for raking gravel. It's much heavier. It's harder to work, and it's not as light as this one. And I use hose occasionally, but not very often. This one looked like this one, but I cut it down with a grinder, and I use that for cultivating too, in between the rows. These two cultivators here I use for weed control. This is my favorite one because you can get really tight into the plants without damaging the stalks in that, whereas this one might cut them off because it's sharp on all the way around. So this one works on a push-pull basis, and you can bend this to suit your height so that when you're working it, it's flat on the ground. This one's the best one I like for doing the garden because it cuts the plants off just below the surface of the soil. So when you plant your seeds in, just before you do that, you can rake this along the path, and it cuts all the weeds that come up, and then your seeds can come up too around it. This is a little cheapy one I made. That one there cost me $50 to buy it. This one I made out of a piece of steel banding, and it does exactly the same thing and just as well. This is a little clod cultivator, which I used to use, but I don't use it anymore. And two Musser shovels. This is a flat shovel. It's good for edging around. And this is a spade, a long-handled spade. I have several short-handled spades too. There's a difference on the angles of these. This one's made for digging and lifting. And this one here is made so that it's comfortable, like here, that you can step on it and it goes straight into the ground, whereas this one goes down on an angle. And you got your standard grass rake. I made a little one, a little banding tool for when I'm down on my hands and knees going around the stuff. Small shovels. This is called a dibble. It's just a wooden broom handle, which I poke into the ground and plant my tubes, my little tube. I just wiggle it around in there and drop a newspaper tube in it and just fill it in with water. That's how the plants get planted into the garden. This is a little gizmo I made for planting pea seeds. After you work the row up and level things off, you just stick that into the ground until that hits the ground, and it's 1 inch deep. That's what you want your peas at. So you drop a seed in each hole as you go along. And you obviously need some cutters for pruning and whatnot. I prefer the ones that slice side by side rather than the anvil type where you got one cutting edge hitting on a flat surface. These ones cut more effectively. And you need a pair of scissors too, of course.
Thank you so much. I was wondering, what do you do exactly to maintain them? How often do you have to change them? And I know they're all very different, but if you could tell us more about it.
Well, they don't need much maintenance. The pruners just need oiling in here a little bit, and otherwise the steel is so hard, it's very hard to sharpen. It shouldn't be really necessary to sharpen these. Just lubricate them. These ones here, I've had to sharpen these ones because I got them second hand and they had little nicks in them, so I did sharpen them a bit, but it's quite difficult. It's very hard steel. The shovels, what they need to do is, it gets all rough here, and I take a grinder and I grind the edge down, make a sharp edge, so it's a lot easier cutting sod and cutting through roots. I do the same thing with the spade. It has to be cut and ground off with a grinder to make it sharp.
I'm wondering if maybe you could just show how you do it.
If it gets plugged up, you just flip it over to the other side and do that. Now, this is what I like my small rake for. And I can just take this. Just rake all the stuff up, all the weeds, and put them in a bucket. Go down to their compost bin. Just rake them up and drop them in a bucket. That's what that goes for. This one does the same thing. It's a little wider. Much the same with this little gizmo. It's not very sharp anymore, but do the same with this. If you want it, but it's much slower. So it's less work. And what this does is it aerates the soil. And I spread about an inch of compost on the top of here so that it allows some of the compost to go down in the soil. If you use a rotor tiller, it's always mixing the soil up, and it destroys the structure of the soil because the bacteria form in different layers at different depths. Each different bacteria likes its own place. And if you mix it all up, it takes about 6 weeks for the bacteria to sort themselves out. You need them to feed your plants the nutrients that they require. This is called a broad fork. It's a manual tilling device. You just step into the ground, you just rock it back, then you just lift it out, move down about 3 inches.
Where would you get one of these, Gerry?
I bought this at Lee Valley about 30 some odd years ago.
What about the other tools? You have several stores. You mentioned that some of them are secondhand.
Yeah, the 2 cultivators I showed you here, they came from Lee Valley. The other ones I've had them so long. I started gardening when I was 9 years old. My father started a contracting business. He couldn't take the garden, so I took over from him. And I've been doing it ever since, whenever I had property. Now, what I did was I planted my carrot seeds in the ground. After I worked the ground up, I planted carrot seeds in the ground, and then I put burlap, the cloth, over top of the ground and dampen it. The burlap in it will keep the soil moist while the seeds germinate. Carrots take about 2 weeks to germinate. So around 2 weeks, I come and I take the burlap off, and I put this cage over top of it so the squirrels don't dig in there. Squirrels love to dig something up that you planted, like my newspaper. tubes. I put a plant in the ground, and you turn your back, and the squirrel's right in there digging it up. Because I think he thinks that another squirrel's buried something there. So he pulls the plant out, and there's nothing in the hole, so he just takes off, leaves the plant on the ground to dry out in the sun. These have saved me a lot of grief. I have to constantly repair them because the wood rots in contact with the soil. After I transplant my transplant plants into the ground, I put one of these cages over top of it. And because the plants are transitioning out into the sun, I use these old bits of snow fencing to put over top. And it gives them about 50% shade for the first week or so. And then I take them off and the plants are fine. They don't get sun scalded. I use the snow fencing for my leaf corrals over here. What I call the leaf corral, I store my leaves over winter in the leaf corral here. I use these reinforcing bars. I drive in the ground to support the walls in an upright position. And I have this plastic lagging we used to have when I worked to get it on the reels of cable that comes off. It's just a protective coating. And they just threw it out, so I acquired quite a bit of it, and I've been using it for the last 30 years. It's starting to break down now, but it's served its purpose. It just keeps the snow fencing from rotting from the being wet all the time. Like I said, I put 350 bags of leaves, which I collect off of the streets just around in my neighborhood in the fall. It takes a lot of effort to bring it in, but it saves me a lot of work in weeding in the garden next year.
So this is such a big and beautiful garden. So we were wondering, now that it's fall, what are you doing in order to preserve it and take care of it when the winter is gonna come? Yes, are there some plants that are still blossoming or?
Now that fall's here, in harvesting time. The eggplants here, in this row here, will be harvested. They'll be frozen, or I use them in soups and things like that. There's a row of radishes right next to it. They're the white icicle radishes. They're fairly mild. They're nice. And I will pick those and put them in damp soil in pails in my cold storage room for the winter. The leeks next to there, the row of leeks, they will be harvested, and they'll be put into plastic pails as well with damp soil to be stored in the cold storage room. The kale, the various kinds of kale over there, there's purple and black and green kale. I chop that up and put that in the freezer, but I leave the plants in the garden over the winter. I cover them in plastic. Now these kale plants here, what I don't harvest this fall, what I don't use personally, I will take down to the food bank, which I have been doing during the summer, my excesses. Some of these plants will be left in the garden to overwinter, covered in plastic. And come spring, they will start to grow flower stalks because they're biennials. They want to seed the second year. But wherever there's a leaf node on one of these plants, like right in here, there's a flower bud waiting to grow. And when it comes spring and it warms up, they'll send up a little shoot with a flower stalk on it. It tastes just like broccoli, only sweeter. And I pick those off, and we have them in salad raw. They're really nice and tender. Now the Swiss chard, which is these plants here, there's various kinds of colors of chard. I chop up the stalks and the tops and put it in the freezer. Unfortunately, the little goldfinches and other birds, they just love eating these things too, and they chew them full of holes. But there's no way to stop that. Over here, I have celeriac. It's a root celery, and it's quite a large plant here. It grows a large root like a turnip. and they store very well. I ate the last one of those in the end of May. It came out of the cold storage room. These are celery. They will get harvested and put in plastic pails in the cold storage room, and we'll eat those for most of the winter. In here are peppers. They're all falling over right now because they got so heavy in the peppers. But whatever is left on these when the frost comes, here's a big one there coming. Whoops. That one we eat. They get chopped up and frozen on a tray and put into a bag in the freezer, and then I can add this to soups. They're good for that. These plants over here, okra. Whether you're familiar with okra, one pod on here right now. It's a small pod. That's the seed pod after the flower. It belongs to the hibiscus family, and it has it's a large flower about that big. It's beautiful. And then the seed pod forms afterwards, and we cut it up and I use it in soups. It's really gooey stuff. They call it gumbo down the States. Is where the fairies live, the garden fairies. You've got to have a wild spot in your garden for the fairies. That's where they hide when you're out in the garden. They don't come out, but they're active for the rest of the time when you're not here. I don't know what they do, but...
So you put flowers within...
I don't tell it. I don't do anything to it. It grows, whatever grows there, grows there. They do that. They plant whatever they want in there, so I just leave it alone. This wall here is my wall of blackberries, wild blackberries. They were here when we came, and I just trained them up on these wires. It makes it easier for picking, and it keeps them from going all over the place, because what they do is they send out these trailing runners. They're very prickly, and wherever they touch the ground, a new plant grows. So what they do is they grow from the mother plant out into the ground, and then they keep going and going, and they'll fill your whole backyard in about a year or 2 years or so. So I got to keep them under control by training them up on these wires and tying them. I get about 60 liters of berries off of this wall in the summer. They come out every morning. I spend an hour picking berries from these things and put them in the freezer. And we eat them all winter. Okay. This is my little greenhouse here. I have a fig tree growing in here, which will produce figs if the chipmunks will leave it alone. They usually eat them before I get to them. I have several other fig trees. The other ones I haven't found yet, and I get figs off of that. In here, in the spring, when it's still cold outside, I bring transplant, lettuce and bok choy transplant, and I fill this whole area up here with them. And this is our spring crops. There's a kale growing in here right now, and I have a couple of cucumbers which have succumbed to the viruses, but there's 2 cucumbers on that one that are ready to pick. They were planted in after the lettuces went out.
Did you build your own greenhouse?
Yes. There's little plastic pieces I bought from Home Hardware. They used to sell this kit that if you get 2x2s by 8 feet long and cut them in a certain way, and you put them together, you end up with this greenhouse. Now it's got some improvements on it, but basically it's the way it should be. I got in here, you can see these plastic couplers together here. And there's base couplers in the bottom there where you stick the 2x2s in and you put them up, the same couplers up the top here, and then you put these braces in. I've added these braces. In the spring when my plants are in those trays, I bring them in here And I have some snow fencing. I put my plants when they're in those plastic trays up here, and I can water them, and they can grow in the springtime while it's still too cold outside to put them out. This is an automatic device to open the window up. We got from Lee Valley. It closes down at night and opens up, and they're fully adjustable to whatever temperature you want. They work really well. I've had one 12 years now, and it works just great still. Frames hanging up there. I string those with baling twine up and down, and that is my bean trellises. You can't see it very well, but you come over here. My climbing beams grow up these strings. I hate bending down picking beans off of plants at the ground level, so I grow climbers, just about exclusively climbers, and get lots of beans from these. This is another fig tree that lives outside during the winter. It's a kind of semi-hardy fig, and it's going to be late this year, but it is growing.
What are those berries?
It's called a dog rose, that one on the fence there. Gets nice rose hips on it. I bought that as a deterrent for the neighbors, the college kids from jumping over the fence all the time. So it was much larger, and I strung it out on the fence there so that they wouldn't be climbing over it. Mm-hmm. There's dandy thorns on it. What stopped them?
Do you get a lot of pollinators in the garden here and also in the front yard?
Yeah, a lot of pollinators, yeah.
That's great.
This is my tomato arbor, which I build up every year in a different spot in the garden. Basically made out of T-bars, 2x2s screwed to it. And these are pipes they use for the top rail and the chain link fencing. I grow my tomatoes up. I use the twine from last year's bean trellises. Like when I cut them off there, I put them up here off of the tomato cages as a support. I can tighten them up, and when the tomato plants grow up, rather than tie them, I just wrap them around as they grow, and that keeps all the tomatoes up high. So I use those strings for at least 2, if not 3 years, because I'll take these and I'll save them, and if I'm putting any brush or stuff out, I use the string to tie the bundles up.
A lot of different plants, fruits, vegetables, even berries, and I was wondering, are there any specific ones that require more care and attention?
Oh, definitely, all the time. The tomatoes, they're very prone to frost. They're prone to a lot of diseases as well. Blight, late blight, early blight, and stuff like that. So there's not much you can do about protecting them from frost, except in the spring you can cover the small plants with plastic. I had plastic tubes that I used to put the tomato plant in the ground with a plastic tube, and I just pull it up over the top if there was going to be a frost, and that would save them, but I don't bother planting them that early anymore. It doesn't pay. Only gains maybe a week at the most on the plant, so there's a lot of work doing that. I still have all the tubes, but I don't use them anymore.
So what month of the year would you put your tomatoes in?
At the end of May, the last week of May is pretty much safe. I've seen frosts into June, but not very often. This year, it's been the earliest frost we've had that I can ever remember. Except that one year when Mount St. Helens erupted, we had a frost in August that year because it was so cold. If you're buying the seed, it's called endive. If you buy it in the grocery store, it's called escrow. But anyway, it's a fall lettuce plant, and you don't start the seeds until 1st of July. You plant the seeds out, and they grow a whole bunch of little plants. And then you dig them up, and you cut most of the green off. You leave about an inch and a half of green, and you transplant them into the garden. I'll show you over there. I got a whole bunch more, but the slugs don't get it. This is really, really sweet in here. And this will stand a certain amount of frost. I planted some of these into my greenhouse last year, and we ate them in the spring because they overwintered in the spring. The second year, they're a biennial, so the second year they want to go to seed. So the plant grows bigger, and then it starts sending up these seed stalks, which are really tasty in the spring. It tastes good after the frost. I got lots of these things in here. These are climbing beans. They're called fat white boys. They're like a Polish. They're really good when they're dried. They're for dried beans. They're not for eating in the pod. The pods are very stringy in that. But they make a huge bean, and by cooking them during the winter, I can make wonderful soups with them. They're a late bean. They're just coming on now, so I hope the frost doesn't get them. Had a little bit of frost on them. These leaves are wilting because they got touched by frost. But it was really patchy this last frost we had.
These are all beans here too, right?
Those are green beans.
They're huge.
See the big there? It tastes really good. Not bitter at all. These are my green beans, but they're pole beans. And I've gotten about 60 pounds of beans off of these plants this spring. They're just about finished now. There's still lots on here. I've got, I don't know, probably about 60 or 70 portions for a meal in the freezer, which we'll eat this winter. This is my asparagus bed. We eat this in the spring when the shoots are coming out of the ground, the end of May, early June. We get quite a few spears. This bed's only 3 years old, so it'll get much bigger as it ages. This is where I had potatoes in the ground here. I plant the potatoes in here, and in order to keep the squirrels from digging them up, I put this chicken wire over top of it. There's one in this. So the chicken wire, the plants can grow up through the chicken wire, and I just cover it with shredded leaves. Take dry leaves and shred them down and put them up on top of this. And that prevents potatoes from going green. It stops the squirrels from digging them up. I had this patch, which is 4 feet by 16, and I had 4 feet by 32 feet over there where this other stuff was growing. And I harvested 201 pounds of potatoes from that.
So everything over there is yours too.
Yep. This trellis here I made for peas. I grew what they call telegraph peas. There was this row and a row on that side too, and I got copious amounts of peas from this trellis. And when the peas come out, I put cucumbers on, which are struggling with the viruses that affect them. These are endives here, this row of endives. Some of them got touched by frost. You can see the browning on the leaves. but the majority of them were okay. Some of the squash plants in the black just some of the leaves got burned. The ones that are dried out and dark, they got frost, and the other ones didn't. This is a row of parsnip in here. I've been harvesting that because I love putting parsnip in soups. It tastes really good. There's some more Chinese cabbage underneath the cloth there at the end, the white cloth. And these are my beets in here. The chipmunks love eating the beets. They'll take a 3-inch beet and devour it in a day or two, just gouging it out. These are all raspberries. They're not ever-bearing. I don't like picking them all year, so they produce what they can in the summer, and then they're gone. There are several berries, bushes, gooseberry and black currant bushes in the back there going along the fence. There's a huge comfrey plant in the back corner, which I take some of the leaves and stalks and use them in the compost for nourishment.
Oh, you have a glass greenhouse?
I bought that at Canadian Tire. It's made in Israel. I would say it's 14 years old now. It's gone through numerous repairs, but it's still hanging in there. I think it was a good investment. That's mostly where I harden my plants off in there. I've got hydro. I got an extension cord that feeds hydro in there, and if necessary, I got a small heater I put on at night that comes on when the temperature gets down near freezing, just to save the plants. I don't use it very often, but it has to be there. There's not much in there right now. These are the squash that got hit by frost. Only some of the leaves, these ones, got the frost, and these ones didn't. I don't know, there's no rhyme or reason to them, to the way it happened, but that's the way it goes. There's quite a few squash in here. Here, I'll show you this one over here. These are butternut squashes. They're almost ripe. They get a little bit darker in color. These ones here are called acorn squashes. They're not quite ready yet. Hopefully they will be. But even the frost kills them. These ones here, when they're small like that, they can be eaten just like zucchini and salad. They're quite tasty. I think this will all. The compost I screen out of that bin, so that I put all the large lumps back into the compost to go through the system again, so I don't have these large sticks and stuff in there. And this opportunity of picking out any plastic and putting them in the garbage, because there's a lot of leaves in here, I get a lot of plastic, little shreds of stuff. Okay. This swimming pool is part of my rain system. I collect the water off of the garage roof, comes out this pipe and into the pool, and the house water, I'll show you when we get up there, it flows into another barrel and flows out here. You got this hose here draining from the house catchment system into here, and then I use this pump here to pump water to water the garden with. I have this smaller pump for watering inside the greenhouses by the rain. Or I use this larger pump for watering the garden. on over here. You see where the pipe comes off of the roof of the house here. That drains the short portion of the front all the way around the side because I have the side drain blocked off. So it all flows down into here, goes down this pipe into this barrel. This holds about 1,500 liters in here. And then there's a drain here with a hose that goes over to the pond. So this gives me a lot of water for the garden. And I do have a Sandpoint well pump there, which I can get some water out of. I'll show you that. There it comes. I can take this and put the water into the pond or into a bucket. But it takes a lot of energy to do this. It takes 100 pumps to fill a 20-liter pail.
Are those goldfishes?
Yeah, there's 4 goldfish in there. They're about 6 inches long. And in the winter, I drain this down. In the late fall, I drain it down and I catch the goldfish. And I put them into this barrel in the ground. This is where they live. In there. They will hibernate in there over winter. I cover it with leaves, bags of leaves, and I put the aerators in there. And they're fine. In the spring, I pump the water out, catch the goldfish, and put them back in there. They're about 8-10 years old now, these goldfish. They don't come up much. This is my enjoyment. I don't have a television. We've got a TV screen down there, but we're not hooked up to cable or that or anything. So this keeps me busy all year. This is my herb garden.
They're just so pretty.
And got parsley in here, and these are Russian kale plants. They're volunteers. I let them go to seed one year, and they come up all over the whole yard now because the birds get the seed and they transport them around. But this is lemon thyme, this little plant here. It's kind of like a golden lemon thyme. This is sage. There's some more of these walking onions here. This is regular thyme. This one here is lemon balm. This is French tarragon. This down here is oregano. Good for Italian. I dry all these herbs and put them in bags for the winter time. This is what's left of the basil. I'm surprised that didn't get hit by the frost. And these are all dill plants. They are all volunteers. They just grow every year. You know what ground cherries are? This is a ground cherry.
Do they stay that color?
This is when they're ripe, they turn yellow. And that's the ground cherry. I don't think there's any more ripe ones here. But I grew these one year. Now they grow everywhere because I allowed them to go to seed. They're quite good, actually. And these in here are scarlet runner beans. They have purple flowers. They have large purple seeds, as opposed to the white seeds of the other one. Not quite as big, but when you cook them in the wintertime after they're dried and you soak them and cook them. They're kind of meaty tasting. They kind of taste like almost a little bit like beef. They're quite good. This trellis is new this year. I just thought I'd try and see if they grow up over the porch so we get some shade, but they didn't do that. They want to keep growing straight up. I guess that's the full tour.
Well, thank you so much, Gerry. It was so lovely to see your garden, to learn from you how to use different tools and how to preserve your garden during the winter season. It was really fascinating. So thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. I always like to share what I do, and just me, I guess.
Thank you so much. Great. Thank you so much. That was a very informative video. And now we'll be starting our Q&A session with Gerry Fradette. And let's begin with our first question. What is the actual size of the garden in feet, Gerry?
The garden lot is it's a tapered lot. We live in a survey on a curved street, so the front is only 46 feet wide, but the lot varies from 168 to 225 feet down the sides, and about 180 feet across the back. So the whole yard is involved in garden except for a small portion of grass up near the porch.
Okay. Thank you so much. Another question, how many times in a week do you water your plants? Do all plants need to be watered at the same time, or does it differ depending on the crop?
Well, it depends on the crops and the amount of rainfall we get. I don't know whether you can see this. I have a little gauge here that you stick into the ground, and it tells you what the moisture content is at the root level. So that helps as an indicator of how much moisture is below the surface. Because I use mulch, I use the leaves for mulch on the ground. It's hard to tell how moist the soil is underneath the leaves because the leaves dry out on the top pretty quickly. So that gives me an indicator whether they need water or not.
Okay, thank you so much, Gerry. Another question, still related to the different seasons. Based on your experience, what type of plants do you see that grow best in the summer, and which ones grow best in winter?
Obviously, like the heat-loving plants like peppers and tomatoes, and that they grow best during the summertime. Other plants that want to seed the second year, of which all the cole crops, the cabbages and that, and the carrots, parsnips and that, they prefer the cooler weather. That's when they do all their growing. They're storing up lots of nutrient in the ground, in the roots for the following season so they can flower. Garlic, we usually plant garlic in October, about the time you'd plant tulip bulbs or daffodil bulbs, so that they develop a root system during the late fall. And then in the spring, when there's lots of moisture, that's when they send the top up. And they like lots of moisture, and they'll grow quite a bit in the fall and in the spring once the ground thaws out.
Okay, thank you so much once again, Gerry, for giving us a bit of information what kind of plant grows best in summer and in winter. We have another question. It's a little different. Does it matter whether I grow my plants in a container, raised beds, or in the ground? Which one do you think is effective, or does it differ for each crop? So if you have maybe a couple of examples that you want to share with us.
Well, I tell the truth, I don't know much about growing in containers or raised beds. I tried raised beds a long time ago, and I didn't like it. It was too much work because I use leaves to cover the whole garden, and I don't have too much problem with weeds growing. And the leaves keep the moisture in the ground for me, and it's a lot more work. I have enough work with my little chicken wire enclosures keeping the wood from rotting. If you put raised beds in, as far as I'm concerned anyway, is that the wood's going to rot out in a few years anyways. So you have to replace them all.
Thank you so much, Gerry. And perhaps one last question, going back to tools and equipment. So can you talk about how you maintain your garden in the summer versus winter? What type of tools and equipment do you use? Maybe some tools are specific for only one season.
No, not really. I use the tools all the growing season. Use cultivating tools more when the weeds are growing, in the spring and that. I don't know how else to answer that, really.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Yes, we realized that lots of tools and gardens always require them for different seasons, different needs. So thank you so much, Gerry. We really appreciate you answering our questions. In wrapping up, just like you to know that TREA is offering a number of how-to workshops this year on topics that are influencing our current interests and behavior given the COVID-19 pandemic. We hope through these workshops, individuals will take action on climate change on a personal level. For more information, please visit our website at www.tree.ca or Facebook page TREA London.
Okay. I want to thank you all for the opportunity here. It's been my pleasure.
It was lovely to have you with us, Gerry. Thank you, everyone, also for participating in TREA's How to Workshop with Gerry Fradette. And we look forward to seeing you folks again in our next session.
Okay. I'll be there.
Great.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.